I think this is going to be a great panel, and I hand things over to our distinguished moderators and panelists.
Hey, Jeff, thank you very much. We have an amazing wealth of spaceflight experience, both from the research goes on the ground and then from the research and work that has happened on orbit. What I'd like to do first quickly for all of the panel members, I know some of the folks will have been in on the great conversation that just happened on what's going on in the moon and plans that direction. And some of the panel members were in on that. But what I want to do, I'm just going to introduce each panel member very quickly on my own. And then if you could please add anything important that I forgot about the stuff that you're up to now or something that I don't know about. And then you have one of two choices. Number one, if you could summarize what you think is the most important contribution of the International Space Station so far, just in very brief words, that would be interesting. Or on the flip side, because of our experience, if there's a very brief perspective you have on the space station, some little insight that some of the people on the panel don't know about, I think that would be elucidating as a way to start as well. But of course, the overall objective, and I'm going to start with you, Bonnie, so I'm just giving you a warning. Our overall objective is the theme of maximizing the use of the ISS, past, present, and maybe more importantly, immediate and distant future. So that's where we're headed with this. But the first panel member I'm going to introduce briefly is Dr. Bonnie Dunbar. Bonnie served as an astronaut for several years and flew in space 5 times, multiple different types of space flights, including going to the Russian space station Mir twice. Since then, she was the CEO of the Museum of Flight and is a university professor at A&M. So Bonnie, with those 2 questions in mind, number one, greatest contribution of station or any, and make it quick, any personal observation, and then any holes I have in your bio. I'm passing it over to you first, please.
Well, thank you very much. It's a real honor to be amongst this group. So let me just begin with perspective. I started out life as a material science engineer, mostly ceramics, high temperature materials. And in 1983, before I flew, I had the opportunity to edit a book, an international book on materials processing in space. And so I had the opportunity to fly a space lab with Germany in 1985. That was D1. We had a module in the back, 2-shift operations, 7 days. And out of my 5 flights, I had 3 space lab missions, 2 with international crew. My third one was the first docking mission to the Russian space station Mir, where we did joint science as well. And so what I saw 2 things there. First of all, the value of training together and maximizing the output. So I trained in Germany for 7 months. Most of the experiments on D1 were from Europe and Germany, and trained in Russia, of course, for STS-71 and that first docking mission. What I observed is I wasn't up there long enough. There was some incredibly good research going on. We just needed more time. And the space station is allowing that time and continuity. Also observed that if you're going to plan to develop commercial markets, such as for such research areas, such as protein crystal growth, which we flew up repeatedly on the shuttle, then you need to give the market some promise of access. And on my STS-50 flight that we actually, with Larry DeLucas on board, we're actually able to demonstrate that we could not only grow proteins in space, but we had a microscope and we could actually change the chemistry there and modify the research. So the station provided that platform that we needed for long duration research. I believe we'll always need a platform in low Earth orbit. That's where we're going to develop advanced life support systems and test them, be able to bring them back and forth to the Earth. And if we're really planning to send people out for 3 years, 5 years, whatever it is, we need to send them with reliable life support systems. So the station is a research bed and it's also an engineering test bed.
Thanks, Bonnie. Next, I'd like to go to, and I think that's an interesting observation that we'll dig into later, that we will always need an orbital station for Earth with people and experiments going on board. And we can talk about that later. Luca, I'd like to go to you next. Luca Parmitano is an Italian fighter pilot and test pilot a polyglot. He speaks multiple languages, incredibly accomplished. Luca has flown in space twice, I believe, 2 long durations flights on the space station, and has done spacewalks. And I think he's our most recently flown panel member, having been on the space station and landing just at the start of this year. So Luca, something short, an observation about the greatest accomplishment, or maybe a little insight into something that you observed or did in space that maybe the rest of the panel members and people online don't know about.
So there is something, first of all, thank you so much. If I may acknowledge the fact that I was your backup during expedition 34 and then I flew 36. So I had the privilege of spending some time training with you and spending time with you during quarantine. And just for everybody to know that I consider myself very lucky to maybe call Chris a friend and a mentor. So that I need to put that out. Secondly, it's really hard for me always, and anytime I'm asked to mention one thing, because it's almost as if I'm doing something unfair to everything else that an incredible program like the International Space Station has achieved. But today you're asking me for one thing, and of course I want to give the opportunity to all the panelists to talk about it. One thing that is very, very true for me is that if I can summarize it in one word, would be awareness. I think that all the space flyer have expressed in one way or another that when you fly and you get to be off the Earth and you have the opportunity to look at our planet, you achieve a special feeling, a special relationship with the planet. And I would call that awareness of its fragility, its beauty, especially today, after a little over a year spent in orbit, in 2 separate occasions with time in between to see how certain phenomena have become more intense, more frequent. And I'm not an expert, but science indicates that global warming is behind those phenomena becoming so devastating. I'm talking about hurricanes, flooding, the forest fires, bushfires. After seeing it with my own eyes, I really am convinced that capability to feel awareness and to give awareness is something that only a space platform can give. And the space station, having been there for 20 years, has been the only available platform to do that. And so I'm thankful to have had that privilege.
Thanks a lot, Luca, and thanks for the kind words. Elena, I'd like to ask you next, if I could, please. Dr. Fomina works at the Institute of Biomedical Problems, has been long involved in understanding how the human can function long-term away from the planet. And I would like to ask your inputs, please, also, please. Пожалуйста.
Спасибо организаторам за то, что есть возможность посмотреть еще раз и встретиться с друзьями в такое тяжелое для нас время. И, конечно, благодарность прежде всего Джорджу Эбби. И я не имею, конечно, такого опыта, как наши дорогие астронавты и космонавты, когда они говорят об МКС. Но я хочу сказать действительно глазами ученого, для которого это уникальная платформа для выполнения экспериментов. У нас есть модели, которые мы используем на Земле. Это и бедресты, и сухая иммерсия, в которых мы пытаемся моделировать эффекты невесомости. Но только в условиях МКС мы можем получить реальную невесомость, такую именно, которая представит нам и сенсорные входы, именно такие, как они будут во время межпланетного полета, какие они будут во время полета к Луне. И та же самая вестибулярная система, как бы мы ни старались, мы ее не можем выключить в условиях моделируемых на Земле. А это, естественно, накладывает отпечаток на все наши эксперименты. И я еще хотела сказать, что то, что мы на МКС выполнили хотя бы один годичный полет, который близок по продолжительности к полету на Марс, а на Мире у нас было там 6 годичных полетов или около годичных полетов, потому что у Полякова он был 438 дней, даже длиннее, чем как мы предполагали, или сопоставимый с полетом на Марс. Поэтому я думаю, что на уровне вот этих новых технологий нам надо, очевидно, что мы сейчас настроены на Луну, которая следующий этап. Но надо не забывать, что длительные полеты позволят нам подготовиться к межпланетным миссиям, что у нас дальняя цель все-таки освоение глубокого космоса. И поэтому я вот считаю, что для ученых необходимо, ну вот то, что Бонни уже сказала, необходимо сохранить нам эту лабораторию. Действительно, это уникальные возможности, которые мы на Земле смоделировать не можем. Мы только приближаемся к ним.
Spasibo, Elena. And for the folks that are listening that don't speak Russian, what Elena was saying, maybe the most important accomplishment of the International Space Station has been the fact that it has been a readily available, practical international test bed for the reality of weightlessness and the reality of isolation from Earth in order to do the real experiments under weightlessness. Also, the psychological impact of that, and the fact that it's preparing us for the necessity of a similarly long duration flight to get from here to Mars. And you can simulate those on the ground as much as you want, but having the actual test bed up there has been invaluable. So, spasibo большое, Yelena. And I flew in space with Bill McArthur on my very first space flight. He's a wonderful mentor to me. He's an Army aviator. He flew on 3 different shuttle flights, and then he flew on a long duration expedition 12. And then he was director of safety and mission assurance at NASA. So Colonel, I think we promoted you to Colonel while we were on orbit. Bill McArthur, if your quick insights, if you could, please.
Sure, Chris. And wow, you're right on target. It sounds like you must have kept a copy of my bio somewhere. And I'm going to take maybe a little broader perspective on the significance of ISS and the importance of and how we maximize the use. And that's really in the name of it. It's international. And you know, most space programs had, you know, particularly the US, and then even more so the Soviet and then the Russian space programs, they really tried to have some international participation, but to a certain degree, it was not the core and the essential nature of spaceflight before ISS. And I think that's so important because it helps change our view of not just our planet, as Luca mentioned, but also ourselves as members of the human race, in that we're on this planet together. And as so many of us have remarked, that from space, you don't see, you know, it's kind of a trite thing to say that you don't see international boundaries. But what I think is important is that the ISS has changed the way people view space. You know, we still think of it a little bit in terms of national competition, but more so we think of it as a cooperative multinational endeavor. And if we think about the value, one of the real valuable aspects of ISS is helping us to learn to live and work for a long duration, for a long period of time in space, so that we can eventually leave low Earth orbit permanently. We clearly will not do that as individual nations. We will clearly do that as a multinational, worldwide cooperative effort. And what's and kind of to segue into the second part of your challenge to us, you know, we all have an idea of what happens on ISS, and we focus so much on the research, and as we get into more commercialization, the research will become more and more diverse, and I think more and more, well, commercialized. But Valery Ivanich and I had a slightly different experience on ISS. with only the two of us, we unfortunately did not do a lot of groundbreaking historic type of research. We spent the majority of our time just keeping the station operating. And so it was very much, you know, so having two test pilots up there was probably a good thing, because we like tinkering with the flight hardware a lot, and we had the opportunity to do just that.
Thanks, Bill. And I think what you've said, it ties into the moon conversation that was just held, in that with Europe signing on, I think if you total up the nations for the Lunar Gateway right now, there are 26 nations that are working on that together. And if you had looked at that from the perspective of when you joined the program in 1990, that would be sort of inconceivable. And yet that's the reality of where the space station, the international station nature of the station has led us. So I agree with you. I'd like to go to Dr. Mike Barratt. Mike was a flight surgeon, medical doctor, flew as a long duration space crew member on the ISS, and did a shuttle flight towards the end of the shuttle program, and has been working in the NASA Human Research Program, heading it up for a while. And looking a lot at Mars as well, I think. So, and Mike and I did survival in the northern woods of Canada with a lot of snow at one point. Anyway, Dr. Barratt, over to you, sir.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chris. I'll have to clarify that I only ran HRP for about a year and a half, and one of my biggest accomplishments was choosing my successor and the successive staff that I think has just done a great job. I'll start off with a personal note. I think that astronauts and cosmonauts are heavily curiosity driven. And I think we're happiest when we're learning new things and seeing new things for the first time. And that was certainly one of my best memories from station, is being the first to see science results on ISS and sharing the excitement of the investigators. That's pretty amazing. And I have to say, it's very gratifying to see many of the astronauts, especially in these recent years, become co-investigators on these papers. And that's not just to add astros to the paper. These astros are 6 layers deep in the detail of the subject, and they're really excited about it. And that science output, I think, has been tremendous. So I'll maybe give one overall output statement, and then throw out a provocation and try to move us on. First of all, the ISS has certainly given us solution sets, practical solution sets for exploration. So obviously, we've got the long-term experience. We know how to operate. But we know hard numbers about maintaining crew's health, fitness, bone density, muscle mass, aerobic fitness, and whatnot. And we can do that with confidence in the time to get to Mars, at least one way, and it's not that difficult to envision two-way. Now, aside from warm feelings, a lot of people ask for hard outputs, but I would say that this is about as hard as you can get. This is the second edition of our space medical textbook. And I'm not trying to be self-serving, because this was written by me and about 80 of my closest friends. And of course, we don't make a penny off of it. But this is largely based on ISS physiologic science. This gives us a physiologic basis to practice medicine. You cannot practice evidence-based medicine without an evidence base. And that type of output is not tracked as station utilization. You really don't find it anywhere. And yet we have this knowledge base and a practical organization of findings that we can use now to springboard outward. And you could write a similar textbook on environmental control, life support, materials, nutrition, any number of things because of ISS. Now here's the provocation, and I'm channeling Shep here, who has also mentored me in various ways over the years during the Shuttle Mir program. I don't think personally that we're bold enough in the human science that we do on station. When you look at history, some of the most clarifying experiments we did on shuttle were fairly aggressive, invasive. They involved central venous catheters, intravenous tracers, Barani chairs, chromium tag, red blood cell studies, and they really helped to shape our understanding of the human in space, but they've never been repeated for long duration. And if there's a couple things we found out is, first of all, some of those things that happened in the first 2 weeks are undone, or they continue unchecked in the direction that they're going for long duration. The other thing is that there's things that are right under our nose that we've never seen because they aren't on our risk-based radar, if you will. And so I think we need to do some more aggressive studies and probably more system-based studies off the chart of our risk portfolio. Some of you may be aware that we're working on a project to look at direct intracranial pressure in space. Now, when we first brought this up, someone said, you can't do a spinal tap in space. And all the docs said, of course you can, it's easy. We do, you know, in fact, if anything, it'd be easier in zero G. So we're probably not going to do that, but flying somebody with a sensor is something we are definitely looking at. And if we can't use station to really clarify something as fundamental as spaceflight associated neuroocular syndrome, then we've really lost an opportunity, and we're doomed to try to untangle this with a very low flight rate in an exploration scenario. So that's my provocation, and I will leave it at that.
Thanks, Mike. And yeah, setting the precedent of space-based medicine so that now we can draw more logical predictions for what we're doing further. And as you say, that even applies to something as fundamental as what legal system will we live in on the moon. You know, the International Crew Code of Conduct for the International Space Station has kind of set the fact that we don't have to obey one particular our existing set of rules in order to go to a new place. In fact, you can't. So yeah, it's a good thing to follow up on. We have 3 more people, and then I'm going to hand it over to Dan to start in any other questions. But I'd like to go to Dr. Julie Robinson, PhD in biological field, worked in private industry for a while, and then thank you very much for assuming the role of being the space station chief scientist. And I'm really curious to hear your initial reflections here, Julie.
Thanks so much, Chris. It's great to be here with everyone. I think by far, looking over the past 20 years of ISS, the most important accomplishment that we've seen, and that this is selected across all kinds of great papers published in Science and Nature, all kinds of new knowledge, but it's really what we've done to extend our knowledge base for duration of astronauts living and working in space. And we can confidently, as Mike said, we can confidently say we know how to support crews to be healthy and to do great work for 6-month periods of time. We also are starting to understand the boundaries of our knowledge, as Elena mentioned, that most of our 1-year missions were flown in Mir. We've only had a handful of those on ISS, and we have extraordinary new knowledge to link that to in understanding personalized medicine, the role of genetics and genomics in determining human risk. And so not only do we have that accomplishment of duration for exploration behind us, but we have the next 10 years to look at how do we extend that and have our ISS studies be the bridge to the durations that we need to go to Mars. And those durations are a year out and a year back, probably, approximately. And so there's work there still to be done. It's really important that we have ISS for that period of time. I want to transition and talk a little about what we're doing internationally to make that a reality, because we're also moving from a period of experiments that are focused maybe on a single physiological system to looking at integrated tests that are analogs for exploration. So for this last decade of ISS, we're ready to not only extend durations, but look at a variety of other integrated parameters that affect the health and the performance of the crew. Things like isolation and confinement, simulating autonomy and communications delay, looking at the way we perform medical care if the crew can't do live video conferences with their physicians, and the way we perform our support functions if the crew can't talk live with their families. And also looking at what happens after a long duration in space when you transition back to surface operations. So over the last year, Oleg Kotov and I have been spearheading an effort with our colleagues in the Human Research Program, with some kickoff conversations with Elaine Fomina, with some other conversations with a group in Europe, the Italian Space Agency especially. And we're calling that for short ISS for Mars. That's been out there in the international sphere as kind of a handle, if you will, for this effort. And we just came off of 3 weeks of virtual meetings with our ISS international partners, with over 100 agency leaders, to talk about the ways that we can do these kinds of integrated tests over the coming 10 years. It's not something we're going to do tomorrow on ISS, but we do have, the program has built in capabilities we asked for, like the ability to simulate comm delay, the ability to integrate the way that we're operating in ways that are Mars forward in informing us. And some of the things that you may have heard about or that you'll see coming forward are an additional set of one-year crew members and other durations of crew members with a standard data set called Cipher, which allows us to actually use duration for the first time as an independent variable across whole suites of crew members. That has extensive international collaboration. Looking especially at our Boeing landings as we get to Boeing CST-100 and we have desert landings, and working to build on what we've learned from the field tests in Kazakhstan with crew members landing and looking at their performance, linking that now to the opportunities we have in the US commercial crew system, so that we can better understand what the crew can do and when, as we look at a future Mars mission and probably 30 days on the surface after a one-year transit. Also, we have started.
Julie, just thanks. We're just
Okay.
limited to an hour, but that's a wonderful introduction to.
Well, let me just mention then one more thing, Chris, because I am no longer ISS chief scientist.
I know.
Because of the importance I've not been that for a couple of years, but because of the importance of linking ISS to Artemis, he has now set up a science and technology management function at the human spaceflight level, and we're making sure that these kinds of activities on ISS are actually transitioning and linking to Artemis and the way we use Artemis, so they both come together to prepare us for human missions to Mars.
Yeah, doubly thank you. That was worth mentioning. You're right, but that really pointed us superbly in the direction we're going to go here in a minute. I just need to introduce Shep and Mike LA, and then we'll hand it over to Dan. Shep obviously was the first commander of the International Space Station, and LA is even maybe potentially going to have after having commanded station, have a chance to go back there commercially. So it's sort of like bookends on the space station's experience over the last 20 years. So Shep flew multiple times in the space shuttle, and then was the ISS program manager in the 90s, and then of course commanded the station first. So Shep, I'd like to hear your initial perspective here, if you could, please.
Thanks, Chris. I'll try and be brief. This is a great panel, many friendly faces that I haven't seen in a long time, and hi to you all. I was asked many times as we were spinning up to do ISS, Shep, what's it going to take to do a Mars expedition? I thought about that and I said, okay, it's going to be 4 things. The vehicles that go to Mars are going to be very big, probably more than one vehicle in a fleet going there. These vehicles are going to be too big to be launched with a big booster. They're going to have to be assembled in orbit somewhere. Multiple nations are going to have to be involved. We don't have the finances, the technology, even I would say the willpower to do it singly. It has to be a group of nations. And these missions are all going to be long. The hardware is going to have to be robust and redundant. The crews themselves, they're going to have to be exceptionally tight, meaning that they get along together well and they're very high performance. And they're going to be self-reliant. And so if you look at what those questions are about and you look at ISS, the answers to all those questions are behind us. Space Station is the answer to how to do that. I just want to finish by saying NASA has a history of doing great stuff in far-reaching programs like Apollo and Space Shuttle, and then taking all the documentation out to the dumper and starting over again. And this is a historic shortcoming in how we do space. So my question about how to best utilize ISS, let's not waste what we have gained and learned on ISS.
Yeah, I agree completely. And those four things you just put up, that's a wonderful sort of legacy of what the ISS has proven and done and given us all the practical experience that we need in order to have some confidence going further away. But yeah, how do we, and Julie talked about it, of course, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. Last out of the panel is Mike Lopez-Alegria. We were classmates when we got hired back in '92, a long time ago. LA was a Navy pilot and flew on multiple shuttle flights, and then commanded the International Space Station and has done 10 spacewalks, and has been heading up commercial space inside the Beltway for several years since he retired from the astronaut corps, and now works with Axiom Space, looking to commercialize space station, and has been, at least in the media, of course, it's easy to say things in the media, but has been talked about maybe going to be flying, and you're probably having to talk about things that you don't want to talk about, LA, but going to be flying a Crew Dragon with Axiom, with non-astronauts on board to go use the space station for new types of applications. But LA, over to you.
Thanks, Chris. It's good to see your face as well as those of so many friends that are unfortunately becoming increasingly unfamiliar due to these interesting times. And it's a great panel. I echo Shep's word on that. It's tough to answer the question that you posed, especially after 7 others have given their very fine answers. But I do have a little bit of a different take. And that is that when you look back in history, it has been the role of governments to expand frontiers. So this is what happened when the Spanish kings financed what ultimately became the discovery of America. Lewis and Clark expedition was government financed, et cetera. And then when security is established and it's proven to be safe, then the government get out of the way and they let commercial enterprise come in and establish commerce there. And so the International Space Station is a Plymouth Rock of low Earth orbit. So when we think about what's going on in human space exploration or any space exploration, there's an infrastructure pyramid where right now, even talking about the things that we're sending routinely anyway, farthest from the planet, which are geostationary satellites, all that infrastructure is on the ground. We build them on the ground, we launch them from the ground, we control them from the ground. Well, ultimately that infrastructure pyramid, as our point of reference gets farther and farther away to cislunar space and one day onto Mars, we need to build a base of that infrastructure, not only on the ground, but also in low Earth orbit. So one day, ISS, as wonderful and accomplished a platform as it is, will as a machine wear out, and it will have to be deorbited, and it will be replaced by one and then several commercial space stations. And this will begin what ultimately will be a vibrant economy in low Earth orbit. And we can all point to the pioneering government efforts that the 5 partner agencies came together with to put ISS in orbit to start all that.
Thanks, Elliot. And yeah, and if you look sort of the fact how the advances in transportation took us from Columbus, which just proved it was even fundamentally possible to get across the Atlantic, to Plymouth Rock, to the eventual industrialization and commercialization that happened after that. There are some parallels, of course, but although the speed is pretty rapid. And if we look at the commercialization that's happening now with vehicles that are coming down the pike, assuming they can keep up with the pace that people are talking, that's going to really change things even more rapidly than most of us are ready. Okay, finally, I would like to hand it over to my co-host of this, Dan Burbank, longtime friend, Coast Guard helicopter pilot, flew on 2 different shuttle flights and was commander of the International Space Station and is now a senior fellow at Collins Aerospace. Over to you, Daniel.
Okay, thanks very much, Chris, and thank you all for being here. This was quite a panel. A quick couple of programming notes for everybody. For those who are listening online, we do have translation. So if we have Russian speakers, answering questions, there's a interpretation button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You should be able to click that and get real-time, simultaneous interpretation. Also, for those who are tied in, I'd encourage you to go ahead and use the Q&A link that's also at the bottom there. So if you've got some questions from the attendees, we'd love to roll those into the discussions we have. I would offer one thing just for all the panelists, if you could. If we had a lightning round coming up, maybe after this next question, think of maybe the one gap that you would like to plug in the remaining time we had in ISS, kind of briefly. So just kind of put that in your mind. Think of what would be the one thing you would like to do to capitalize in the remaining time that we had in ISS, if you were to think of that time as being dwindling. And we all, I believe, hope that it'll continue for quite a few more years. So I'd offer that up. One question that did come in was from Rusty Schweikert, and Rusty points out that he agrees with everyone. A lot of people have already voiced the opinion that the first word in International Space Station really ends up being one of the greatest legacies. The fact that, we become explorers representing humanity, that we're able to find common ground, common interests, and then build some of the most tight-knit teams you could ever imagine. And we don't have to, be from one country to reflect that. So that's a great thing. Rusty's point was, though, however, the elephant in the room, as he puts it, is the absence of China in the integration of human exploration activity in space on this international, stage. So his question to you is, what efforts should we now be making to add or merge China and its exploration initiatives, which are indeed impressive, into the future? So I think I would go ahead, and I'm going to offer that question up to you, Bill. You've got the longest, I think, legacy thinking about ISS as a system, as a program, since its early days prior to the current inception when it was Space Station Freedom. And you helped build that international team that we have.
A real quick answer. I was apprehensive about including the former Soviet Union into the program, as were many, and that turned out really well. I have been optimistic that we could do the same with China, but I've spent more than a decade kind of on the other side of the fence, looking at strategically where we are going as nations. I say no until the Chinese better accept some of the values we cherish in the West.
Okay, and before we move on to any of the other questions, do any of the other panelists want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, Dan, this is Billy Mack. Sort of drawing on what Shep said, I think the key is, it may be twofold, is one is it has to be something that is sufficiently attractive to the Chinese that they are willing, that they're willing to meet us somewhere in the middle. And so the second part of that thought perhaps is that, is there a way for us to make the value proposition sufficiently compelling so that the Chinese are willing to, in fact, give up something, if you will, in order to gain a seat at the table for international space exploration?
Okay, well said on both counts. Well said on both counts. Okay, so I have one question I'd like to offer up to Luca here. As we think through ISS, I think a lot of us had an idea of the kinds of things we would learn, the kinds of things that ISS would teach us. We, as gradually as ISS has progressed, we as space flyers as a community have learned a lot from each other. We've learned from those who have gone before, as we often do. Was there are there certain things about the operations of a space station, Luca, that despite all of the trading stories around the table at Cottage 3 or down at launches and landings as we watch our comrades head uphill, anything that when you got there was a really big eye opener for you?
Absolutely, Dan. And I think you and you, Mike, Chris, probably can all share this point of view that we can learn how to operate a machine. We can learn how to execute an experiment. We can read a procedure and make sense of it and ask for help. I think that for me, the biggest eye opener on the first expedition, the first 6 months, was understanding how to operate myself. How do I interact with other humans when I'm in a confined space and I have to learn not only how to move around the environment, but how my body interacts and interfaces with everything else. And then 6 years later, when I was the commander of the space station, now I was in charge of also the human factor of making sure that the parts of the system that are human were also all working within themselves and among themselves to the best possible outcome. And I think that my impression and one thing that I learned right away is that there's no training that can be given or can be received to learn how to work with humans. It's a continuous experience, a continuous learning curve, and it's continuously adjusting. You have to adjust yourself, you have to adjust your expectations, and you have to manage everybody else's. So I think that the leadership aspect and the followership aspect of being an astronaut on board the space station for a long duration flight was something that really surprised me, and I hope that it helped me evolve into a better astronaut and a better human.
Okay, so thanks very much. I have a question from Danielle Carroll, who is one of the attendees, and this is a follow-up, Mike Barratt, to one of your comments. And she says that with the goal of maximizing the benefit of long-duration, low Earth orbit flights on the ISS, do you anticipate any formal change in regulations governing in-flight medical and biological testing in the near future to permit more invasive scientific studies, such as those that you're talking about? In other words, how might the scientific community potentially help lead the way in broadening the current approach?
Yeah, thanks for that, and greetings to Dr. Carroll. Hope you're doing well out there. It's not those regulations that are holding us back. We have ways to hold ourselves back, and a lot of those deal with kind of the fear factor, the shock value of doing something invasive, which seems to have grown since the shuttle world. And also the idea that we don't necessarily control the vehicle that takes people to and from the station. Now that changes with the commercial world, and we hope that we might be able to do more things because of that. But I think that the idea that, first of all, the infrastructure we have in place allows these studies hasn't really permeated everyone yet. So that's first and foremost. The second thing is that it should be understood the ISS is about the safest platform we have to do these types of studies. It's well understood, it's close to home, it's large, communication is great, we have ways to get home if we need to. There is no better opportunity than what we have right now to perform some of these studies that I think give us critical insight in some of our knowledge gaps. The simple answer is that's not what's holding us back, and we have to kind of work within. We definitely would like to do these more internationally as well.
Okay.
Dan, I'm going to pick it up if I can.
Yes,
and
sir.
this is for Yelena. Obviously, we're looking at utilization of the space station. And the initial piece of the station is launched, gosh, whatever, 22 years ago, and people for the last 20 years. But there are big, important laboratory parts of the station that are going to get launched within the next year. And the Russian laboratory module, Nauka, is about to be launched. I'd just like to get a little bit of insight, if you have it, please, into what are the plans for, is it the type of work that Mike Barratt was just talking about? Or what are the plans for the work that's going to be done on the new Russian laboratory module, giving a part of the station a whole new life?
Я думаю, что действительно, когда мы сможем подключить MLM, это будет следующий шаг в развитии и технологий для медицины, для лабораторных исследований. Как уже сказала сейчас, во время обсуждения уже прозвучало с Джулией Робертс о том, что мы должны перейти на новый этап для того, чтобы технологии омиков мы могли использовать прямо там, в условиях МКС. Для того, чтобы мы те технологии, которые сейчас уже в условиях Земли, геномика, мы должны это все сейчас в ближайшее время именно в условиях невесомости протестировать. Потому что за то время, пока мы получаем образцы на Землю, могут произойти какие-то изменений, а мы, готовясь к межпланетному полету, должны сейчас найти наиболее информативные маркеры для того, чтобы определить, какой стандарт здоровья космонавта, кого из членов экипажа можно отправить на Марс. Я не боюсь мечтать об этом. Что мы сейчас должны, исходя из вот этих вот интегративных подходов, исходя из того, что мы должны протестировать и психофизиологическое состояние, и биохимическое состояние, и состояние генома, определить, как мы должны скорректировать, может быть, программу тренировок, медикаментозную поддержку. И все-таки всегда помнить о том, что у нас впереди цель освоения Марса и дальнего космоса. Когда, я еще хочу сказать, когда не будет поддержки такой постоянной с Земли, поэтому это будет автономный полет. И в этой связи мы сейчас, например, уже отрабатываем так называемую программу виртуального тренера, моделируем изменения физической работоспособности человека вот под влиянием всех наших, например, тренировок или еще каких-то воздействий. Причем вот эта вот модель, она, конечно, пока еще, это первые шаги только, она реально потом заменит сотрудников моей лаборатории, которые сопровождают тренировки на борту. И мы должны все эти аспекты учесть вот в лабораторном модуле.
Spasibo, Elena. Just one very quick follow-on question. At the Institute for Biomedical Problems and sort of in the smoke break talk there, because you're the only representative of Russia on this panel, what is the feel for how long Russia is planning to use the International Space Station? The fact that they're just launching a new module will indicate a pretty long view of the continued use of ISS, maybe beyond what a lot of people are thinking. What is sort of the feel for how long Russia intends to use MKS?
Ну, я, конечно, вы понимаете, что я могу сказать сейчас с меня, моим словам можно верить только наполовину. Но я думаю, что еще я думаю, что до 30-го года мы протянем. Несмотря на то, что мы постоянно продлеваем эксплуатацию станции, и понятно, что мы доставляем какие-то... Но до тех пор, пока не будет замены адекватной нашей станции, я думаю, что мы будем продолжать эксплуатацию МКС. Но я повторяю, это только мое мнение. И я мечтаю о том, что мы будем как можно дольше использовать. Но насчет МЛМ, действительно, когда я разговаривала с Олегом Кононенко, который сейчас является, руководителем отряда космонавтов, он сказал, что его называют МЛМ-гай. То есть вы правы, он много раз предполагалось, что именно он будет запускать МЛМ. Но вот меняются все время планы, и он в очередной раз, готовясь к полету, сказал, что наверное, все-таки я когда-то запущу это МЛМ. Всегда есть обстоятельства, которые выше нас, и мы это все понимаем. Я хотела, не знаю, будет ли еще время мне поговорить, я бы хотела сказать еще один момент, который, мне очень хочется, чтобы он прозвучал на нашей панели. Обратите внимание, когда я начала говорить по-русски, Крис не понял, что есть перевод, и он сразу подключился и начал меня, перевел. Это вот прекрасный пример того, что во время панели по МКС существует такое же вот сотрудничество, как оно у нас есть и на борту. То есть так же, как на МКС, всегда космонавты и астронавты, как мы говорим, подставляют плечо, если какая-то есть проблема, то есть помогают. Также я почувствовала, что из-за того, что Крис не знал, что есть перевод, и понял, что я говорю по-русски, он для всех участников перевел это. И я думаю, что это прекрасная иллюстрация того, как мы умеем работать вместе. И еще на прошлом саммите у нас разговор был такой с Джорджем Эбби. Давайте попробуем номинировать МКС на премию мира. Мне кажется, что это должно идти от нашего саммита, потому что это прекрасная иллюстрация того, как мы можем сотрудничать в условиях космоса. Я хочу, чтобы мы сделали это.
Спасибо большое, Елена. Thank you very much. And I should just be smarter enough to know that there's a translation button, but it's nice also to be able to speak a little bit of other people's languages. We have 5 minutes left, and Dan, I'm going to hand it back to you, sir.
Okay. I would just point out before we do the quick lightning round, and again, just as a reminder, things that you would do for the last remaining time that we have with ISS, if there's one gap that you would want for us to really focus on, something we haven't necessarily covered with. So just think about that. George Abby just pointed out, and I think he's got a very wise perspective on this. He said regarding China, China practices this, so we should probably try this too, and that is Sun Tzu's 31 best pieces of leadership advice. And it kind of also harkens back a little bit, I think, Shep, to what you were saying. And that is, knowing, keeping your friends close and your enemies closer still. And maybe at some point your enemies become something different than that. And so his point is, if you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself, but not the enemy, you will also suffer defeat for every victory gained. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. So for us, as we think back to the beginning of our international cooperation with our former Soviet, now Russian partners, the Apollo-Soyuz docking effort was an incredible way for us to learn to work with Russia. And it paved the way for a bright partnership, that's lasted well into these many decades now, leading up to and through the couple of decades of ISS. So his point is, we don't really, we don't know all the things that are going to work correctly and safely in space. We've got lots of challenges on the technical side, but sometimes the geopolitical things can be almost as challenging for us. And the idea is to partner with all of humanity and be able to make space a safe pursuit and something that's uplifting for all of us. I think for the great lesson that I think school children and young folks across the world gain from this is that we are one humanity and we are one generation of explorers that are now contemplating going much further than the immediate proximity of Earth. Okay, so lightning round. I know we're probably within like 3 minutes until we finish this whole thing. So I'm just going to kind of run down real quick and just in a couple of words, what things would you pursue if time was dwindling on the ISS? So Julie, for you, please, what would be a gap you would like to fill?
So understanding the individual differences in performance of crew members as they transition between different gravity states so that we can be sure they can operate independently on the surface of Mars in those first critical days.
Okay, very good. Billy Mack.
Propulsion technology. We know how to go back to Mars, and we have the technology, I think, to establish a base, a presence there. We desperately need more advanced technology in propulsion if we're going to go to Mars.
Agreed. Luca.
So on the same line of what Billy Mack just talked, I would stress the importance of developing EVA capability. I have had 6 EVAs and one very interesting one that really opened up the door to the fact that we need to improve both the systems, but also in general what the system allows us to do if we are going to do surface exploration. So use the space station to test and experiment and develop new systems.
Okay. Bonnie, one thing you would fill for a gap on the ISS to maximize utilization?
I would say programmatic continuity. We learned our lessons when we canceled Apollo and had a long gap before shuttle, and then we canceled shuttle and had a gap before Mercer crew. We need that continued presence in low Earth orbit because we not only lose the technology, we lose the workforce.
Very good. LA.
Yeah, so not surprisingly, I'm going to pull on the commercialization of LEO thread a little bit. And an important factor in that is building demand, because obviously for a business case, you have to have customers and there has to be people wanting to do things. So I would like to see us maximize the use of CASIS, now ISS National Lab, to prove out some of those, not just sort of fundamental research cases, but more advanced, higher TRL, actually up to and including fabrication capabilities that could be use cases that could provide an economy in LEO.
Very good. Elaine, if there was one pursuit we should complete with ISS in the remaining time, what would it be for you?
Я думаю, что мы прежде всего должны подготовиться к возможности самостоятельного выхода на поверхность другой планеты. И это должно быть только после пребывания в реальной невесомости.
Microgravity is good in some respects that way. Mike, how about you, Mike Barratt?
Yeah, was that for me, Dan? Sorry.
Yes, yeah, I'm sorry. Mike, if you had one research or technology advancement pursuit on ISS in the time we had left with it, what would you go after?
Okay, well, I would say that the time we have left is hoped for but not known, so that has to be prioritized. It's a complicated platform, and everybody else is hitting the big things. I would do the physiologic experiments necessary to rewrite Guyton's textbook of human physiology for 0G, and preferably for between 0 and 1G, so you understand the G acquired dose, so to speak. I guarantee you will find some surprises in doing that, because we have found surprises serendipitously. And I think we really need that to inform Mike LA's commercial population about what they're really getting into.
Yep, very good. And Shep, over to you.
Better ways to take an international crew, train them and allow them to manage very complex systems. And it's an advanced technology, human-computer interaction question.
Very good. Okay, and Chris, over to you.
Yeah, I'm going to answer the question. Actually, Dan, did you have an answer to that question in your mind?
Well, if I were to say one thing, and it kind of ties into the surprises as well. You know, we, as space flight participants, as the astronauts, have never had to be the maintainers like we do on ISS. So that's kind of a new challenge, and we're learning a lot about that. We're making the hardware better and better as we go, but it would be good to, I believe, spend more time, give the crew more autonomy in that respect, and learn, you know, have them learn how to do this with the ground kind of releasing a little bit of the oversight, because for exploration class, that's going to be key.
Yeah, thanks. Boy, that was lovely how the thoughts went all the different places. My input would be, we have all the different partners of International Space Station. We managed to dock an Apollo vehicle to a Soyuz vehicle in the 70s when the Cold War was at its height. And that kind of broke the ground and led to the hand in glove day-to-day cooperation we've had between Russia and the United States and all the other partners. I think we should use the ISS, especially now that there are multiple vehicles that can take people there. Find some way through some of the international partners, whether it's Europe or Russia, whomever, Canada, to have a Chinese astronaut on board the International Space Station. If we can take Tom Cruise up there, surely we can find a safe way to break that ice and get ourselves headed in that direction. I think there'd be, it may be very difficult, as Shep pointed out here at the start, for a lot of valid reasons, but you got to start somewhere, and that may be a great legacy of the space station as well. Jeff, I think we've gone a couple minutes over, but hopefully still within budget. I want to thank Dan very much for co-hosting with me and for looking the best of all of us here with your tie on. And for everybody else, spasibo большое. Thank you very much for your time, your expertise, your patience, and maybe most importantly, the opinions that you've expressed to try and help shape other people's thoughts. Thanks to everyone.